Every empire believes its moment is different, that its systems are modern, that its institutions are stronger, that history somehow has been solved. But when you strip away the slogans and the charts, decline always follows the same mechanical sequence. Not because leaders are foolish, and not because people suddenly change, but because the structure that once made power effortless quietly reverses. This is a story about that reversal, not about panic, not about collapse headlines, but about how material constraints reassert themselves after long periods of abstraction, and why silver, of all things, keeps appearing at the fault line. For most of history, empires rose by controlling production: food, energy, labor, metals. Control the inputs, and you control outcomes. Rome controlled grain flows. Spain controlled silver mines. Britain controlled shipping lanes and settlement systems. The United States controlled industrial output, energy, and post-war finance. In every case, power began as something physical. But success creates a temptation. Once dominance is established, empires stop focusing on production and start relying on trust. Trust in paper. Trust in promises. Trust that claims on the future will always be honored because they always have been. That's when the system starts to hollow out. In the early phase, nothing looks wrong. Growth continues, prices remain stable. The reserve currency circulates globally. Trade settles smoothly. But underneath, something changes. Real buffers are quietly consumed. Inventories shrink. Stockpiles are sold. Redundancy is removed in the name of efficiency. The empire still looks strong because the symbols remain. The currency is still accepted. The institutions still function. But the margin for error disappears. History shows this moment clearly in World War I. Britain entered the war as the financial center of the world. Sterling was trusted. Paper claims were accepted across the empire. But the war strained the system. Supplies had to move. Payments had to settle. And in India, the most important peripheral region, trust cracked. India did not run on paper. It ran on silver. When Britain attempted to pay for supplies with promises instead of metal, merchants resisted. Confidence weakened. And once confidence weakens at the periphery, control weakens everywhere. Britain did not solve this with speeches or reforms. It solved it with metal. Specifically, American metal. In 1918, the United States melted hundreds of millions of silver dollars. Not to save itself, but to stabilize Britain's imperial system long enough to survive the war. Real reserves were sacrificed to patch trust where paper failed. That worked once, but only because reserves still existed. Fast forward to later empires, and the pattern repeats. Spain flooded Europe with silver, then lost control as inflation, debt, and dependence overtook production. Britain extended paper claims far beyond its industrial base and watched sterling fade slowly, not collapse suddenly. The United States inherited the system, but with a crucial difference. America's dominance rested on unmatched production after World War II. Energy, manufacturing, technology, logistics. The dollar worked because it represented access to real goods. For decades, the system functioned. Then the reversal began. Manufacturing moved offshore. Consumption replaced production. Debt replaced income. Finance replaced industry. The dollar remained dominant, but increasingly by habit rather than backing. And critically, strategic stockpiles were sold off. Not just silver, but oil buffers, industrial reserves, redundancy itself. The assumption was simple. Global trade will always work, and markets will always supply what's needed. That assumption only holds in stable systems. Silver exposes the weakness of that assumption because it sits at the intersection of money and machinery. Unlike gold, silver is consumed. It disappears into solar panels, electronics, medical devices, data centers, and vehicles. It is essential, but rarely recovered. And most of it is produced as a byproduct, meaning supply cannot respond quickly to price signals. That creates a structural tension. When demand rises steadily while supply remains inelastic, inventories get eaten. Quietly, year after year. This has already been happening. For much of the past decade, silver markets have run deficits. Not dramatic shortages, but persistent ones. The kind that don't cause headlines until buffers are gone. And here's the critical difference between now and 1918. There is no meaningful strategic silver reserve left to mobilize. The United States cannot melt coins because the coins were melted long ago. Governments cannot release stockpiles because they were liquidated decades earlier. The only place to source metal now is the market itself. And the market is not neutral. When industrial systems depend on a material that cannot be substituted easily, price stops being a signal and becomes a rationing mechanism. Whoever can pay more, or whoever has priority, gets supply. Everyone else waits or shuts down. This is not hypothetical. It's how physical systems behave under constraint. Empires don't fail because they lack money. They fail because money can no longer command resources. When promises exceed capacity, reality intervenes. You can see this pattern across history. In Rome, coinage debasement worked until merchants demanded more metal. In Britain, paper claims worked until silver was required in India. In every case, trust lasted until settlement was demanded. That's the stage modern systems are approaching. Not collapse, constraint. When supply chains tighten, nations prioritize domestic needs. When materials become strategic, allocation replaces markets. When buffers are gone, volatility increases because there is no cushion. And when the reserve issuer must compete openly for the same resources as everyone else, power shifts. This is why silver matters historically. Not because it predicts price spikes, but because it reveals whether paper systems still have leverage over physical reality. In 1918, America could save Britain because it had metal. In a future stress scenario, there is no equivalent backstop. That doesn't mean the system ends tomorrow. Empires rarely fall quickly. They adapt, they ration, they regulate, they rewrite rules. But adaptation comes at a cost. Prices become unstable, access becomes unequal, and confidence erodes at the edges first. This is the late-stage dynamic. Not panic, but pressure. Not collapse, but constraint. History doesn't repeat because people fail to learn. It repeats because systems run on incentives and limits, and those don't change. If you understand that, you stop watching headlines and start watching structure. And if you want to keep understanding how these patterns unfold across empires, currencies, and material systems, subscribe. Not for predictions, not for fear, but for clarity before the next stage becomes obvious.